This is apropos. Now, we're now in the final hours until Americans cast their ballots to choose their next president. Today, both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have their eyes on Pennsylvania, a battleground state seen as critical for victory. The Democratic nominee will be crisscrossing the Keystone States before closing the night at a rally in the city of Philadelphia. Her rival, Trump, will be heading there too. Before that, he kicked off the final day of campaigning in North Carolina. There he told supporters that the election was his to lose. It's the first of 4 rallies that he'll be holding today. He heads to Pennsylvania next before making an appearance in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Now, not all votes are up for grabs, with about 77 million Americans having already cast their ballots. Eliza Herbert has more now on those who voted early.
Early voting centres are teeming across the United States, but despite the long queues, the spirit of democracy remains high.
We've been here for 2.5 hours and the mood is still great. We are almost there. We're in the home stretch.
We got in line around 2 p.m. and now it's 6 p.m. Eastern time and we did it. And I'm proud that, we added our voice.
With the polls neck and neck, Americans appear anxious to make their votes count. Already more than 75 million people have cast early ballots, particularly in crucial battleground states. Records have been broken in Georgia and North Carolina, with some 4 million and 4.5 million votes cast respectively. In Michigan, nearly 3 million people have already voted, and in Arizona, 2.3 million. Wisconsin and Nevada have also returned high numbers. So far, statistics show that women have voted more than men, and there has been a larger portion of rural voters showing up early. But it is still not quite clear which party will benefit. 4 years ago, in 2020, a record-breaking 70% of the overall turnout voted early, either by mail or in person. Democrats were urged to vote by mail to avoid the spread of COVID-19, and ultimately the party gained votes in the counties that returned more mail ballots. Scenes of chaos then unfolded after Donald Trump doubled down on unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud and refused to accept the election result. A scenario this expert worries could be repeated.
The more voting at a distance or voting early, voting sort of out of the regular schedule there is, the more challenges there are going to be. If everything happens on the same day, it's harder for the loser, I think, to complain because everybody's following the same rules on the same day, and depending on which state they're in.
Both presidential candidates, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, have encouraged early voting this election.
Well, let's get more on the state of the race with John Zogby, who is a pollster and author of Beyond the Horse Race, How to Read the Polls and Why We Should. Thanks so much for joining us on the programme, John. We really appreciate having you on. Now, you've probably got one of the toughest jobs at the moment right now. It's the last day of campaigning and final polls show the race couldn't be tighter. Tell us what you're seeing at a national level.
We just released our final poll and polled nationwide right on up till yesterday. So there's obviously still last-minute trends that could happen, but we do show Kamala Harris leading by almost 4 percentage points nationwide. And I think the thing that's most striking about it is the gender gap and the education gap. She is doing particularly well among women, even more particularly well among young women. We've talked about a gender gap in terms of men supporting the Republican and women supporting a Democrat. But among young women and young men, that gap is 60+ percentage points. Young men voting for Trump by over 30 points of a gap, and young women voting for Harris by more than 35 points of a gap. Also an education gap, college educated voting for Harris in really large, substantial numbers. Those with a high school education or less voting for Trump. But I feel comfortable in suggesting that Harris will win the popular vote. But, and I know you're going to ask this next, this key battleground states are just a big question mark.
Let's go with that. Let's continue that conversation because it is very important. Of course, this will come down to those all-important swing states. Give us a sense of polling there.
It's tied. There's no other way to look at it. When we see, Trump leading, I'm putting that in quotation marks, by 0.3 or 0.5 or even 1.1 percentage points. There is no trend line here and there is no gap here. We have a margin of error in our business, a margin of sampling error. But when you get to races that close, that's not even within the margin of error. It's just tied. And these 7 states, the Southern Rim, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, and the Northern Wall, the blue wall we call it, for Democrats, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, just too close to call at this point.
You mentioned that the figures very much fall within the margin of error. How much attention should we be giving these polls, especially on the battleground states, if they're not reliable, so to speak?
Well, they are reliable in the sense that they're showing a very close race. And I think that's how we need to look at it. So rather than looking at a pollster's final numbers and saying, oh, Donald Trump is leading in this state by 0.3, and then tomorrow or whenever, God knows, he loses by 2 points, let's not be eager to say, oh, the polls were wrong. It's a close race, no matter which way you cut it. Now, there could be late-breaking developments even tonight or tomorrow, but though nationwide, I'm pretty comfortable that in suggesting that Kamala Harris wins the nationwide popular vote. But in terms of these key battleground states, it is still too close.
Okay, and give us your thoughts on the Des Moines, Iowa surprise poll that came out. Harris has a significant lead according to that poll. Iowa isn't considered to be a swing state in this election, but Trump won it pretty convincingly in both 2016 and 2020. The polls are saying that Harris could win there. How much could that kind of information reshape the race, do you think?
Oh, it could considerably, because what we learned is that, yeah, as you pointed out, it wasn't on anybody's list as a battleground state, and here we have a shock. That pollster, Ann Seltzer, I respect as among the best in the business. But the key finding she discovered, as we have discovered nationally, is the large turnout of women, especially young women, and that the utmost importance to them reproductive rights. That's on the ballot in Iowa. That brought women out to vote. That could be the bellwether in some of these states. The women's vote, especially younger women, and that could put Harris over the top.
It's very much a widening gender gap, as you already alluded to earlier on. John, you're in a position that, we should still be reading these polls. We should still be relying on these polls. I think it's fair to say that they haven't been as reliable as they once were. We can see that in the last 2 elections where polls underestimated support for Trump. Many new pollsters have now flooded the markets, and pollsters are also dealing with this ongoing crisis of falling response rates. Can polls be trusted?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's not look at a poll the day before saying someone is ahead or not ahead. Let's look at the trend line. In 2016, the famous race between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, she was ahead by 10, 11 points in some of the battleground states 10 days before the election. We saw her lead dissipate each day to the point where the day before the election, she was leading by 1 or 2 percentage points, maybe even behind in some states. Instead of saying, oh, the final number had Clinton leading by 2 points, therefore she'll win, you need to look at the trend line, the trajectory of the race. The trajectory was going against her. I think the polls captured that. And I think they're capturing that it's much too close to call. So yes, polls are good. You'd expect that from me, though, wouldn't you?
Yes, but it's good. It's still good for us to know. John, I'm going to ask you to look into a crystal ball for us right now. Who do you think is going to win tomorrow? You're unable to answer.
No.
Okay.
I feel pretty good about the popular vote.
Okay.
It would be polling malpractice for me to project a winner in the states.
Okay. Okay. Well, we appreciate your thoughts. Anyway, thanks so much for breaking down the polls for us. We really appreciate your time. That's John Zogby, who is pollster and author of Beyond the Horse Race, How to Read the Polls and Why We Should. Thanks so much for joining us on World Roundup.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, do stay